Now, when we think of governance, we are not just looking at the structure of the organization. We're looking at all the processes, all the guidelines, all the rules, all of the things that help us to govern our organizations, be it boards, committees, etc. And that buzzword has been around for a while, and persons have put different definitions to it. But if you would recall when Claire was speaking earlier about the 3 pillars, she talked about governing with integrity. Now, the INF believes in operating with high standards of transparency and good governance, drawing on a wide range of best practice from within our sports and from without. The board is accountable to our membership and our stakeholders for ensuring that the sport of netball is governed and regulated with honesty, truth, equity, and reliability. And it is on that premise that the INF decided that instead of allowing governance or good governance to be just in all of the various committees and on the way in which the board operates, it decided to form a governance working group. And on the board, you will see these are the members of the governance working group. And to ensure that we operated with good practices, they also establish terms of reference for that group. And these are only some of the things that this group was authorized to do. A little later in the presentation, you're going to be asked to play an active role where we would have reviewed the memorandum and articles of association and made certain suggestions for changes, and we're going to be asking you, Congress, who have the responsibility for approving them, to do so. Because with good governance, we have to ensure that there is a level that you can understand. So Congress is up there, right? Where's the members meeting in Congress? You're the ultimate authority. Then we have the board, and then we have the associations. During the workshops this week, we're going to be looking very closely at those relationships and see how we intermingle and how we set about achieving good governance. You would have noticed on the INF website, there are various policies, guidelines, etc. How many people have read them? Yes? How many people have implemented them? You know, it's important that we not only read them, we understand them, and that we apply them to our various situations. Because it is all well and good for the board to be practicing good governance. But then if we do nothing about our members, what does it say about our federation? So we have to ensure that we are practicing good governance right through our ranks. The INF board has various working groups and committees working on our behalf in the various disciplines. And what the working group did was to review all of the terms of reference for all of the groupings to ensure that they fitted in with the 2020 vision for netball, and to ensure that there was good governance, and to ensure that all of them followed a format. And we spent time doing that as well. The last thing that we were asked to do was very wide. Any other matters pertaining to the operation of the board, including but not limited to indemnities, declarations of interest, induction, conflict of interest, etc. And like all good project managers, after we receive the terms of reference, we then set up a work plan. And what we did with the grouping is that we allocated out the various areas to the members of this group, and then by conference call or Skype, we met to discuss and to come up with a plan. Now, this slide talks about the status of all of the things that we set ourselves out to do. And we have completed the majority of them. You will see the status on the right and the items on the left that we were allocated. There are a few of them that are going to the board this week when we meet again on Friday, and because we have done our homework, we expect them to be approved. The INF board governance policy, which will ensure that we all know what are the things that, as a board, how we are supposed to be operating, so that there's transparency, accountability, all those nice buzzwords. So that is going to the board this week. We also identified training for the board members, training for our members, which is you. This week at Congress, you will be attending lots of workshops which the governance grouping would have identified and determined that these were the things that you needed to do. The group also did some audits, not only of ourselves, the board, but we also did an audit of the INF to see what was the health of our position when it came to governance. But we didn't just stop there. We felt that even though we had assessed ourselves, that it was important for us to get an external view as to how we were operating. A proposal is also going to the board on Friday for us to have an external review of the health of our governance. In the workshops this week also, we are going to look at the role of the regions. If you glance at the article referring to this, you will see that it is very broad. So in listening this morning, I would have realized that lots of things are happening in different regions. So we thought in the workshop we would come together so that we could discuss what is happening and then draw up a proposal for INF to see what are some of the things that the regions should be doing and look at the gaps to see where we can fill them. We know that some of you would have had governance workshops in your various regions and possibly in your countries. Again, in the workshops, we'll be looking to see where the gaps are and what we can do as a group and as the INF board to ensure that we fill those gaps. The team doing the majority of this work was as follows: Dr. Patricia Butcher. Pat, if you will raise your hand. Right, we have Gabby Hochbaum, but for personal reasons, Gabby is unable to be here. Leanne O'Leary, who is a volunteer lawyer working with the Audit and Finance Committee, and we seconded her over to work with the Governance Committee so that she would be on the ball where changes were being made in various supporting disciplines so that we would be aware, and she's doing a great job. Angela Sanderson, our finance person who's in the office and the lead on governance in the INF office. She's the secretary to the working group. And she did say that she's available if we need to Skype her for questions. Right, we have Claire Briegel, our hardworking CEO, who also sits on that committee. And then there's Octavia Gibson as the chairperson. Now, we're coming now to a proposal for the changes to the INF Articles of Association, and the majority of these changes are to align us with the strategic plan for 2020 and to also ensure good governance. Now, in our working group and all of the groups that I work with, I ensure that I don't do all of the work. So I'm going to call on Claire now to take us through some of the changes in the articles, and I will stay here and help her where necessary. So Claire?
So I know this is a great topic to be dealing with after lunch, so I might get you to stand up and wave your arms at some point, but we're really going to try and explain these to you. On each slide, in the top box, you have the current article from our Articles of Association. In the middle box, you have the changes. So if it's in red, it's new words. If they're struck through, we're deleting words. And then in the bottom box is the rationale, the reasons why we have proposed these changes. So as Octavia said, the Articles of Association can only be changed by Congress, a vote at Congress. So the board have already reviewed these, but they don't have the power to change them. The power resides in this group. So we'll run through them quickly, and we'll take questions as we go through. But we'll try and explain the rationale. So the first sections are to do with the purposes, the powers, and the authority of International Netball Federation Limited, which is our august body. And what we've done is we've had a look at the purposes and compared them to our Netball 2020 strategic plan, and have said, in certain areas, we think that the things that are so fundamental to us as an organisation that they should be explicitly mentioned in the Articles of Association. So this is a purpose of aligning our articles with what we believe are what we're trying to achieve as an organisation. And this first change, which is to Article 2.1 G, is precisely that. And you'll notice that the first additional words are to empower. And that's a word that we take very seriously in this organisation. So I'm not going to read out all of the changes. I'm just going to say that's the reason for that first change, is to really talk about what we really do in terms of empowerment and adding in providing officiating opportunities, which wasn't explicitly said. So that's the first one. And I'm going to keep going unless anyone throws a hand in the air. The second one is to add some more words into Article 2.1 I, and that's to put in the words promote integrity and a high standard of ethics. We want to make that absolutely explicit, that that is part of our purpose. And put in the words good governance. We think it's a better terminology than high standards of administration. So that's, again, the rationale behind that is exactly the same. 2.1, we have no clause which actually speaks about sport development work and partnerships. So this new proposed article is to acknowledge that, to support the development and promotion of netball through partnership relations with governments, non-governmental organisations and other non-profit organisations, particularly in developing countries. I've got the wrong text here, I'm sorry. Let me just check this. I've just realised that changed. We took out the words particularly in developing countries. We felt it wasn't necessary to say that. Okay, so currently we have no mention of facilities or the environment in our current articles. And if you look through the work that's put out by the IOC, and certainly in the Solidarity, IOC Solidarity, they really talk about the impact of sport on the environment. And we think it's time for us to recognise. Now, I think it's because we're a sport that we're not very wealthy, so we don't often get the opportunity to build new facilities. But we do have an impact on the environment when we host large events like this. And we really would like all of our members to think about the impact that they have on their environment. So this is around we promote the establishment and expansion of sports facilities worldwide. We can help to talk to your governments to get more facilities there, but that we certainly wish to encourage sustainable and responsible development schemes and respect for the environment. So that's what that purpose of that new clause is. So the next one is safeguarding. I think I don't need to tell you why we should mention safeguarding in our articles, so I'm going to move swiftly on from that one. Okay, so those were all the changes to the purposes of the organisation, and I'm hoping that they all make good sense to you all. The next sections are around membership. One of the things that you will be painfully aware of is that we have been very strict in adhering to our Articles of Association around membership fees. We actually say in our articles that if a member fails to pay by the end of January, they are automatically suspended. And in the past, I don't think we were very good at actually implementing that. And whilst it might sound very harsh, it's actually, we wish to create such benefit in being a member that you actually do want to be active members and don't become suspended or even worse, expelled. But the current articles give the board very little flexibility around situations where countries have been suspended for a long period and owe us a lot of money. And those might be due to things outside of their control. So the rationale on the changes here is to provide an opportunity for the board to waiver or defer payments. And that's around recognizing that many of the countries have are in very difficult circumstances. We decided, we're suggesting that we take out natural disaster because that kind of restricts the thinking there. There may be other reasons. So it's not that natural disaster is not a problem. We know it is, particularly with all our island nations. So with all the tsunamis and issues that we've had over the years. So we're only taking it out so not to restrict thinking. This is also to do with providing the board greater discretion. We have some members who have been non-members have been suspended but hadn't been expelled properly, and therefore they appear to owe the INF a lot of money, and that's just a burden for them to come back into the fold. These are not countries that have stopped playing netball, let's be honest. And one of the challenges we have is we talked earlier about having at least 120 countries in the world that play netball, and yet we've only got 69 full members, full and associate members, and that to me is a great shame. Our ambition in Netball 2020 is to reach 100 members by the end of this 4-year period, and that's one of the things we'd like to talk to the regions about in the meetings this week. So I'll get off my soapbox, back to the articles. Okay, so that's the next one. Terms of office. So the next section is around the terms of office of the board. This is a technicality which relates to if there is an election for board members, at what point do those board members step down from the board and the new board take over? And in the articles, it previously said at the end of Congress. Well, that's quite difficult actually, because generally Congress is immediately before a major tournament, and we would normally expect that the president who was president for the preceding 4 years would get to open and close the actual World Cup. So that's a technicality. It's particularly an issue if a president were to be standing down in the future. So that one's around being practical about when a board hands over their responsibility. And because there are responsibilities associated with being on the board, we need to have a clear cut-off from when one group ends their responsibility and the other group takes over. So the next one is around the terms of office for the Vice President and further Director. If you remember, if you were here at Congress 4 years ago, the articles were changed so that we would have 2 elections every 2 years. This year, you'll be aware we have an election for Vice President and for the further Director. Those positions were elected 2 years ago on a 2-year term so that we would be able to hold these elections at this Congress. That clause becomes it becomes redundant after this period, because now the terms of office for all the board, the elected directors will go back to 4 years. So that's a bit of housekeeping on the articles. So, but that we have to vote to make sure these articles don't become current until after this meeting. So just a little point of process there. So, are we still all awake? Hands up in the air. Yeah, good. I've still got most of you with. Anyone's asleep? Wake up. Okay. Okay, this is just a bit of housekeeping. If we have any changes on, if anybody steps down mid-term, we needed an article that explained what would happen. And this was around making it fair that if they came in at the beginning of the period, so somebody stood down after a year, the new person comes on, they would then, the 3 years would be counted as a full term. So, but if someone had stood down after 3 years and the new person was, say, only on for a year or 6 months, then it would enable them to not count that as a full term. So it's around the practicalities of the terms of office. And it's a good thing to have limits to terms of office. It provides turnover, and that was something that was voted for in 2013, which is a great step forward. A lot of international federations don't have that yet, even though a lot of the national federations do, national governing bodies do. So moving on. Okay, so this one, this was the point I made about the term coming into effect. Because we had, when we put in terms of office, we needed to ensure some continuity in the board, because actually quite a few of the board had been on the board for more than 2 terms or 3 terms. So we put in a clause that meant that the existing directors that were in place when those articles came in could be extended a little bit longer, just so that we had this period of handover. We need to change that now, because with the elections that are happening now, if we changed the articles, it didn't have a date in the articles to say when that took effect. So all I'm doing is putting in a date on there so that we know to which directors that applies. Otherwise, the new directors would automatically have that clause apply to them. That sounded really complicated. I hope my explanation in the paperwork was better than that. So I'll move on, and then if anybody didn't get that point, I'm going to get Catherine Lewis to explain it. And then moving on to the powers of the board. We just wanted to add a couple more powers to the board. They're not great things that they necessarily are going to be thrilled about, but they're more recognising what they actually do. So the first one is ensuring a clear and adequate risk management process. I'm sure you'd like to know that the board have to do that on your behalf, so it wasn't explicit. And then the next one was to put in some work around implementation of ethical principles and rules. We wanted to put a power in that the board actually were responsible for monitoring the implementation of ethical principles. So a couple more jobs for the board to take care of. I think they are actually doing that, it's just making it clear. So moving on then to remuneration. So this article is really to take note of the fact that for many years now the President has been paid an honorarium, which we would say is extremely good value for money. It's quite a small amount of money. However, it does give us some issues in terms of tax legislation, and this term honorarium, we're an Isle of Man company, and we really need to actually start to call that a director's fee. So that's a bit of practical housekeeping there, so that we're not at fault with our tax authorities. There is a bit of risk around that, because they might, if we didn't get that cleared up, they could potentially go back 7 years and claim tax back for quite a long time. So we'd really like to get that cleaned up, so we don't end up with a big bill. It does mean we will have to declare that, you know, there will be tax that will have to be paid on that, but it's the right thing to do. Moving on to accounts and audit. This one sounds like it's bad news because we're asking for longer before we publish the accounts for you. But actually, we're saying that we struggle these days to get the accounts published to you 30 days out. It's only because we're a bigger organisation these days. We do more, and we now publish a lovely booklet with all the information on the annual report and accounts. So we're just asking if we could have 90 days instead of 30 days to get that out to you. So that's probably in line with any other company of our size, but we're not trying to hide anything, honest. So if you could pass that one, I'd be most grateful. I'm not even sure we complied with it previously, so it would be helpful. And then the final change, we're doing really well. Either you're all asleep or you've done your homework, and I'm going to go for the latter. So the final one is on the definitions, because we tend to talk about players, coaches, athletes, support, personnel, officials, administrators all the time. We wanted a term that was defined so that we didn't have to say all that in every single article. So we're defining the term participants. So, can I sit down now, Miss? Yes. Thank you.